we're really, really excited to have Dave Nutt from Canada Soccer here tonight to explain kind of the background behind standards-based leagues, club licensing, what the player development program is, and also really get to the heart of why the AYSL is here, what the AYSL is, and to provide you as parents and families some really great information to be asking great questions of all the clubs who have achieved a National Youth Club license, and also just to give you some backing so as your children look to come into this league or have an interest potentially in this league or these environments that these clubs operate within, that you've got some knowledge to also go and back yourself up with. So without anything further, I'm going to pass the presentation over to Dave Nutt from Canada Soccer. I'm sure everyone, Dave, at home right now is giving you a round of applause, but everyone's muted and the cameras are off, so we can't see them.
I'm sure they're doing something with their cameras off, but I'm not sure it's a round of applause.
It could be. What I would ask is if anyone's got any questions, please use the chat function of Microsoft Teams. Oh, there, look, there's some pros in here. Did you see the little applause bit at the bottom? And please use the chat function. So if you go up to the top, if you're on a laptop, it's the little show conversation. It's the speech bubble with the couple of lines. And you can chat in there and ask your questions. And what I'll do is I'll rudely interrupt Dave when it's appropriate to ask your question for you, because he doesn't have access to seeing that chat function tonight, but I do. So I'll be helping him make his way through that. So thank you, and Dave, it's all yours.
Perfect. Thanks, Jordan. Appreciate it. And first off, thanks everyone for making the time. Great turnout tonight. I know especially busy lives right now with school back in and activities starting again. I know it's not easy to make the time to be able to attend these types of situations and presentations. And certainly I know we're all a little bit zoomed out and spend a lot more time in these online sessions than probably we ever have before. So I appreciate you making the time. I'm going to do my very best to make it worthwhile for you. So I'm going to spend about 45 minutes or so talking a little bit about club licensing, PDP, and providing you with as much information as I possibly can to hopefully answer some of the questions that I'm sure you have right now. And then we'll have some time afterwards, 45 minutes or so, or as much as we need, or as little as we need if you've had enough of my talking by then, to be able to answer any other questions that we might be able to come from there. And as well, great to have John and Jordan with me, because there's going to be questions certainly that are more specific to CMSA, more specific to Alberta Soccer or to the AYSL that I won't be able to answer as well as they can. So hopefully between the three of us, we'll be able to answer as many as possible, but also important that you're equipped with good questions to ask clubs when you do get to that point where you're thinking about decisions on the best environments for your children, because that's really an important piece, and the clubs are going to have specific information on what they're doing that we won't be privy to either. So appreciate you making your time. Hopefully we make it worth your while, and as we go along, if you have any questions that are burning or you just need to get them into the chat so you don't forget, please feel free to do so. And if there's any that kind of warrant an immediate response, we can do that. If not, we'll have some time at the end to be able to take as many questions as we possibly can. So that's the plan for today. As I said, we're going to try to cover off here. Starting point is, what is the Canada Soccer Player Development Program? And that is a term that we'll use interchangeably with the AYSL. They're not quite the same thing, but I'm going to explain what that means momentarily. But for all intents and purposes, they mean the same thing for this presentation. So we'll start off by giving you a bit of information on what it is. From there, more importantly, why is it important? And then at the end of the day, we like to say in these conversations we have with parents are actually quite easy because you all want the same thing. I'm a parent, I've got two little ones, and I know it's what I want. We want what's best for our kids. So if we're able to provide you with the right information to make sure that you're choosing environments that are providing the best opportunities for your kids, at the end of the day, that's what you're after, and that's what could make you happy. And I say this as well all the time. We're partners in this journey. As a soccer club, as Canada Soccer, as Alberta Soccer, CMSA, we're partners with you to provide a great quality experience for your son or daughter. And that's really what the basis is of the player development program. So start us off. What is the PDP? So I think it's important to provide that little bit of context. Some of you may have heard some explanations on what the AYSL or the PDP is, and some of the information that you've gotten might actually be accurate, but I wanted to provide that from the perspective of Canada Soccer and be able to present why we think this is an important initiative and why it's been developed and encouraged for development across the country. So we'll use the words, as I said, AYSL and PDP interchangeably. They're not quite the same thing, but for the sake of this presentation, they can be used in the same way. So the PDP is a network of standards-based leagues that span the country and provide the best possible developmental environment for young players. And we're going to spend a fair amount of time later on in the conversation talking a little bit more about what we mean by the best possible developmental environment. But the network right now consists of 4 standards-based leagues across the country, which include the AYSL. So we've got the BCSPL in BC, which was the first standards-based league. It kind of led the way and paved the pathway for the rest of the leagues to follow along. There's the OPDL in Ontario, which is the biggest standards-based league right now. They've got 28 clubs that participate. And then finally, we've got the PLSJQ in Quebec, which is a brand new league, just started play at the same time as the AYSL. And based on the demographics of Canada and the population basis, between these 4 major centers, that covers 80% plus of the playing population within Canada. So if we can get these standard-based environments right and getting them creating the right places for our players to play and develop, we can have a huge impact on our ability to develop players right across the country. The other thing that's important for you to keep in mind is one of the differentiators of what the PDP is how it sits within the player pathway at Canada Soccer. So I'll just call up an image here. It's a little bit busy, but hopefully I can go through it quickly enough that you'll be able to understand it. So within Canada Soccer, we've got all kinds of different environments across the country. Some of them, some areas of the country, like Alberta now, have most or all of these environments. Others maybe only have some of them, but this is a reflection of all of the different environments that exist within Canadian soccer. So to start us off, we've got grassroots soccer, which for our definition is everything up to the age of 12. We also have youth soccer, which would be for teenage players 13 to 18. And finally, we have senior soccer environments for players 18 and over. We align this with our long-term player development model, which then allows us to create a stream-based model where we've got some differentiation that happens when we start to get up to that under 13 level. Before that, players up to the age of 12, these are all grassroots players. There's no such thing as a high-performance 10-year-old or a high-performance 8-year-old. Everybody there is playing the game for the same reasons: to gain the experience, to gain skills, to enjoy it, to play with friends. Once we start to get into our teenage years, now we have a few different pathways that we can follow as young players. So the first one off to the far, I guess it would be left-hand side if you're looking at the picture here, is our community stream. So that's about fun, it's about friends, and it's about physical activity. People who are playing for the love of the game, and that extends right up into senior soccer. Old guys like myself that still go out and kick around because we enjoy the camaraderie, we enjoy the opportunity to get a little bit of physical activity and spend a bit of time on the field. So that's there, and an important environment, which is the lion's share of players across Canada which play in that community stream. Beside that, we've got the competitive stream. So what that would be in Alberta is our Tier 1, Tier 2 type programs. Also, for those that are familiar with the event, our current Club Nationals format sits in that pathway. So this is really about players that want to focus a little bit more on the competitive element of soccer. So they want to test themselves against others of like environment or of like ability. They want to play in leagues. They want to travel a little bit, go to tournaments, maybe play in provincial championships. So all of those types of things sit in that competitive stream. Beside that, and aligned to what our PDP is our development performance stream. So the development component for it is the youth area. So the primary focus of all of the program that we have within the youth sphere is around development. So we call it our development stream. As we get into the senior stream, it starts to become more about performance. So when we look at college and university soccer, standards-based senior leagues and semi-professional leagues, now we start to look at environments where the result does matter. And it's more about how we perform in competition as compared to developing in order to move on to a higher level of play. But one of the key pieces of an AYSL program is it sits in this space right in the middle, in the train-to-train stage, and sits right next to our excellence stream, which is comprised of professional soccer, national teams, Rex program, next program, and those high-level environments that support players reaching the highest levels of play within the country, which, as hopefully many of us saw last night and over the summer, we're experiencing a great opportunity right now to enjoy success that really is unprecedented in Canadian soccer. So for the next 3 years, we are reigning gold medalists at women's soccer. And right now we've got as good of an opportunity as we've had in many, many years to reach a men's World Cup. So the game right now at the highest level is in great shape. And a lot of that is because of the structures that have been in place over the last 10 or 15 years related to the implementation and development of long-term player development, raising the standards of soccer that goes on within club environments and within those areas. And we're trying to continue to do that with PDP programming, which is about building standards into youth environments that allow us to create those really positive opportunities for development. So because of the association with standards and the quality of the environments that are created, we're able to position programs like the AYSL and PDP in a different space within the Canada Soccer pathway. And what that does is allow us to recognize those programs from a Canada Soccer perspective as the highest level of youth soccer in Canada. So that's a bit about what the PDP is, but why does that matter? And why do we need a program like that? So as a starting point, the traditional soccer system that we've had within the youth system in Canada makes the game or competition result the most important measure of success. And what that actually does is it emphasizes the result ahead of the development and the preparation of individual players for long-term participation and success. So to make an analogy for you, imagine for those, and I know you're all parents on this call, or most of you are parents on this call, so imagine if the school system where your son or daughter was attending was more concerned with which class may have the highest test score as compared to teaching individual students within those classrooms to read, to write, to do math, and to learn to be able to become lifelong learners. I think if we created that system in education, we'd be failing our kids. But in a lot of ways, that's what we've created in soccer, where our definition of success is which team or which organization is able to win the most games, not about what we're doing for the individuals within that team or within that global club. So I think that we need to think about soccer programming more like a school and less like a professional environment in that performance area where, yes, the thing that matters is whether we win the game on a Saturday or Sunday. That's not what youth sport is about. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the presentation. So there's a really powerful article that was written by the Sport for Life Society, who are kind of the architects of the long-term athlete development model, which is a piece that kind of guided individual sports to develop their own long-term supports for players to be able to move forward. And I think now is a great time to be able to have some conversation related to long-term player development, because the term long-term is at the start of that sentence. And that program was first introduced way back in 2007. And I think what we're seeing now with the success that we're having with our young players on the women's side that participated and contributed to a gold medal performance, the young men that are doing so well for the national team now, that really is our first generation of LTPD players. So those players would have been between 5 and 10 years old when some of the new development principles were introduced, some of the ideas associated with long-term player development. And now 10 or 15 years on, we're seeing the fruits of that focus on development ahead of result, and it's paying dividends with players having opportunities to excel at the top level. So the title of the article there is "Competition is a Good Servant but a Poor Master." And what that means to me is that games and competitions are important. It's why we play. It's what sport is. If we don't have competition and we don't have games, well, then it's not sport. But when the result becomes the priority, we can't focus on development. And what that does is limit what players can achieve. So the question that I would ask all of you, and something that you might want to share as you have conversations with clubs about the types of programs that are available to your sons and daughters, is, are we using competition to serve the development process? Or is competition dictating our behaviors and approaches? And I'm going to give you a good example of that in a minute here. But before we do that, to put those statements another way, here's a quote, love this, from Chris Ramsey, who was at the time the technical director for Queen's Park Rangers, and he's someone who's really highly respected in the academy world in terms of his ability to develop players that go on to play at the top level. So I'll give you a second there to read through that quote and let it kind of percolate for a second there before I provide a few of my thoughts. So it's not a very long quote, so hopefully you've had a chance to have a read through there. So what that means to me is that when we apply adult competition models to youth sport, it's problematic and it limits developmental opportunities. And I'll give you an example of what I mean there. So when our measure for success in youth sport is the number of games we win, it actually discourages development of individual players. So as a coach, and I coach in this age group, under 13, my son's an under 13 boy, and that's the level that I coach amongst some other coaching that I do. But if my goal with those young players is to win games, the best way for me to do that is to pick the most developed, the biggest, strongest, fastest players who are going to help me win today. It's not to support players who may have great potential, maybe newer to the game, maybe a little bit behind physically, and help them to become better players, because that's not going to help me get results in the short term. So it also encourages me maybe to go and look at some of my neighboring clubs who might also have some good players and see if maybe some of those players might want to leave their clubs and come and join my team so that I can win more games. But what I'm not thinking about in those environments, because it's not the measure of success that matters to me, is when I do that, I'm actually bumping players that are from my community, that have been on my team, that have been a part of what I've been trying to develop to make space for players from other clubs. So what message are we sending to our families, to our communities, is that they're replaceable, they're commodities, and we don't care about their development. What we care about is, can we win the game on Saturday? And while that's an important thing for the Queen's Park Rangers first team, it's a lot less important thing for the Queen's Park Rangers Academy team, as Chris Ramsey says here. So if we use standings and results as a measure of success in youth sport, we actually don't encourage player development. We actually inhibit or limit it, because we aren't incentivizing the development of individual players. What we're incentivizing is the ability to achieve results as a collective team. And the two are very different concepts, because we can cheat our way, or we can take shortcuts to achieving results on the field. There's no shortcuts to player development. The work that goes into developing a 10-year-old to become a world-class 20-year-old or 21-year-old is not the same thing as taking shortcuts to win youth soccer games. So in a lot of ways, the measures of success that we have today in youth sport and the things that we view as being really high quality organizations are not actually the things that we believe should be contributing to the success of sport. So I'm going to spend a bit more time on that, because I think that's a really important concept for us to be able to revisit. But the main reason that we need the player development program is for players to develop their potential to the fullest extent. They need to be in an environment that caters to individual developmental needs. And I've shared a little bit about this, but I've got a great quote that I think really hits this home. And it's from Johan Cruyff, who many of you may know, and I would say a gentleman that knows a fair amount about the game. And what he says is, teams don't learn, individuals within a team learn. Development is a personal process, even when conducted in a team environment. And this is a really important thing for you to be able to get your head around, because despite what some of you may have been led to believe, teams aren't selected to play for Canada. Teams don't go on to become professionals. Teams don't receive college or university scholarships. Individual players do. And if we aren't putting the time into developing individual players because we're a lot more concerned with team success, are those players going to be able to fulfill their potential? And are they going to be able to go on and play at the highest level? Beyond that, leagues also don't develop players. The competition in which you play is only a small part of the player development process. So just like in school, the test or the exam is a part of the process, but I don't think that any of us believe that the quality of testing available is how we would select our school or the classroom we're in. It's much more about the quality of the teacher, which in our case is the coach, the resources and supports available at the school, things like the quality of the administration, as well as things like cost, if you're considering private education versus publicly funded schools, the location, is it close to my home, the schedule, what time does the bell ring, what time does it end, what days of the week, and all of those types of things. So it's the same type of thing that you want to think about when you're selecting your soccer program. So you want to think about the developmental environment for my son or daughter, because ultimately we want our son or daughter to have a fantastic experience in the game. We want them to develop their potential, and we want them to go on to play at the level that's appropriate for them, whether that be like me continuing to kick around in a men's over 40 league, or whether that be someone like Alfonso Davies, who now is representing Canada and playing at the highest levels of the game. So again, it's about creating the right environment. So we're going to spend a little bit more time on defining what that means momentarily here, but it's also important to talk about what a standards-based league is as compared to a best with best competition, and dispelling some of the myths of what the PDP is trying to achieve. So I hear this conversation all the time from people, is what we need is best with best. And that's problematic in a few different ways. The first one being, who gets to decide what best is, and how many bests there are, and what criteria are we using to decide who's best? Typically, it's a snapshot in time. It's usually an assessment, a talent identification, a tryout, and we decide, okay, these are the best, so they're going to move into this environment. And we sometimes forget that even within the best, there's going to be differences in play. Player 1, 2, or 3 is going to be at a significant different level than player 10, 11, or 12, or player 18, 19, or 20. What really matters the most is the environment that we're putting around those players so that they can all fulfill their potential, as compared to selecting the players who might be advanced as compared to their peers at a specific moment in time that we might see as a part of an evaluation process. And I'll give you a good example. So if we held up a screenshot of a movie, let's pick a movie that that's recognized for being high quality. So we get a snapshot of the Shawshank Redemption. And would you be able to tell from that snapshot whether or not that was a good movie? Probably not. It's just a picture. There's probably lots of pictures out there from lots of different movies that might look just as good or better. If you start to watch a little bit longer, maybe a trailer, now you can start to go, okay, that maybe looks like something that is of a high quality, and that might be a season or a couple of seasons in a player's journey. But a player's actual career or playing journey is more like a feature film. And it's really hard to tell from those small snapshots in time whether the global movie is going to be a good one or not. So what we need to do is create environments where all of those players are able to achieve their potential because they have the right supports around them. The other challenge that we have is that when we identify players, especially at a young age, it's a really poor indicator of the quality that they're going to have at an older age. And I'll give you a couple of really good examples that I think are relevant right now. So Vanessa Gilles from Ottawa, who played as a center back in the gold medal winning team, she never played for a Canadian youth national team. So she wasn't in the under 17 program, wasn't in the under 20 program. She didn't make her debut for Canada until she was 23 years old. And now within a couple of years is a gold medalist. Another example, Alistair Johnston, so those of you that have been watching the men's games in the last week or so, I think has been one of the outstanding performers so far in qualifying. He went to one identification camp for a national youth team when he was 16. He was playing in League One Ontario, which is a semi-professional league, from 2015 to 2019, and then finally ended up drafted into MLS. Didn't make a debut as a professional player until 2021, and now at 22 years of age, he's playing for Canada and playing meaningful minutes. So these aren't players that were identified at 8 or 10 or even 15 and kind of determined that they were going to be those that moved forward and were going to excel at the game. But because they were provided with good developmental environments, they were given the tools and the supports in order to be successful. Over time, they were able to achieve their potential, and they were able to move forward and be able to play at the highest levels of the game. So it's always important to recognize that a player's journey is a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's not a race to get there as fast as we possibly can, because oftentimes those players that do get there quickly aren't the ones that are there at the end. So what are we doing to make sure that the standards we put in place from a club perspective are helping us to be able to provide better environments for more players and the best possible environments that we can for coach and player? And our belief is that by improving the environment at the club level, because that's where the daily contacts happened, we're going to be able to produce a more consistent stream of talented players who can go on and achieve success at the highest levels of play. And what we mean by the highest levels of play is different things to different people. For some of them, it's playing for a men's or women's national team or playing in a professional environment. And you're all very lucky in your own backyard to have a men's professional program and a women's program that's on that same tier in terms of recognition. So you have those opportunities. Some of your sons and daughters may choose to pursue college and university soccer, and that's a great opportunity for you to be able to play at the top level. Some of you top level might be mean playing in the AMSL or in one of the top senior leagues within the community. But we want you to be able to have the tools, or your children to be able to have the tools to go on and play at whatever level is appropriate for what you want out of the game. So in short, why we need the PDP is because we want as many as possible for as long as possible in the best environment possible. So I've teased this a little bit so far, but I think it's really important for us to spend a little bit of time talking about what we mean by the best environment possible. So what does that mean? And what are we trying to achieve with the PDP? So the first thing is we want to improve the quality and the volume of training. Those are the repetitions. That's how we improve. That's how we develop the skills we're going to be able to use on our tests, which are our game plan. So PDP programs will be training at least 3 times a week, and they'll be training year-round. The coaches within those programs will have all completed the Canada Soccer Youth License, which is a new workshop that's been developed specifically for coaching 13 to 18-year-olds. It talks about the development through the teenage years for all of you who have kids in those ages. Mine aren't quite there yet, but they're creeping into that age as U13 players. There's a lot that goes on. There's a lot that goes on physically. There's a lot that goes on social, emotionally, and mentally. And you need as a coach to be able to understand these things in order to build positive relationships and make sure you can support the appropriate training and development for those young players. We also talk a lot about the newest coach methodology and pedagogy, and some of you are probably about my age. I can't see any of your cameras, so maybe I'm overestimating how young I am, but certainly the way I was coached when I was growing up is not the way that I coach my kids today, and I hope anyway, not the way that others that are working with my children in different environments are coaching. So being able to keep current and understanding the newest methodologies and pedagogies in terms of how to work with youth. Coaches that are participating in the PDP programming all have that background, and they've all gone through that training and that assessment process. We're also creating periodized programming that focuses on the developmental needs of the players. So the PDP program is designed to provide all of your soccer needs in a way that's supportive of development. So you shouldn't need to have supplemental academy training and conflicting schedules and scheduling 12 days of soccer within a 7-day window or participating in programs that don't allow for the appropriate rest and recovery and mental refreshing that you need to maintain that love for the game. So this program is designed to be able to provide all of that in one in a way that makes sense for young players and meets their developmental needs. We also want to provide more meaningful competition for players. And this is a really interesting and important conversation because I'm not sure it's had often enough in the youth soccer world. So our job as youth soccer administrators, as parents, as coaches, is really about facilitating meaningful competition. And what I mean by meaningful competition is games that are competitive, games where the result isn't known in advance, and we know we're going to have a good level playing field in order to learn. Because players learn best from an appropriate challenge. If the challenge is too great, we're going to get frustrated and we're going to give up because we're not going to be able to find success. If the challenge is too easy, we're going to get complacent, we're going to get into bad habits, and we're not going to learn and develop. One of the issues we face in Canadian soccer is the prevalence of games across all calibers of league that aren't competitive. So we have a lot of 5-0, 6-0, 10-0 games where neither team is learning. And when we remove the constraints of the adult competition model, as Mr. Ramsey had presented in his quote, it allows us to be able to find more meaningful games. We don't need to play a balanced schedule of home and away games against every team if we know that that's not going to create meaningful competition for us. It frees us up to be able to take different approaches and be able to find more games that are better for more teams, because it's about the development of the individual players, not deciding which team's going to win the most games. So what can we do to facilitate more meaningful competition rather than less? We also want to increase the caliber of coaches and access to coach education and development opportunities. So there's minimum requirements for all coaches within a PDP program, which is one of the things that makes it a standards-based league. So in addition to having the youth license, as I mentioned earlier, all coaches within that program also have to have training around making ethical decisions, making headway in sport, which is about concussion assessment and management, respect in sport for activity leaders training, which is around building positive relationships with youth, as well as all of the training that were prerequisites for our youth license. So the coaches that you're going to encounter within this program are going to have the training that's appropriate for the types of players that they're working with. It's also a requirement that PDP organizations have ongoing support and development for their coaches outside of coach education. So there's two different pieces here. There's coach education, which is the formal component where we go through and do workshops and we're assessed on our quality. But there's also coach development, which is the stuff that happens every day at the club level. So what supports is your technical director or head of coach education with a club going to provide to those coaches so they can continue to improve? Is there guidance that's going to be there? Are they going to have access to new ideas and supports so they can continue to improve and continue to provide an even better environment for the players that they're responsible for? PDP clubs also have access to an integrated support team of sports science and medicine experts. In addition to providing really high quality on-field training, players can expect to get support with physical training, mental skills training, and nutrition training, as well as partnerships to support injury management and return to play. What we're trying to do is mimic as closely as we possibly can the types of supports that go around a player in a professional environment without we're recognizing that we're dealing with amateur youth organizations. So do you have an opportunity, if you need additional support in physical development, to have an expert who can help you in that area? If we're struggling with things like anxiety, or we're not performing because we don't have the focus that we need to demonstrate what we can do in our training session and our games, are there mental skills experts that can provide that support? Is there nutrition training that we all need, because in the modern game, that little bit of an advantage you get by being properly hydrated, properly fueled makes such a difference. If we do have an injury, do you know that your club is going to take care of your son or daughter to be able to get them back on the field in the most responsible way that they possibly can, because they care about them as more than just a player who's going to contribute in the game that weekend? So all of these things are important components about creating that best environment possible. And the last one, all organizations are required to have technology support. So what that means is they're recording matches, they're analyzing them, and more importantly, they're using that information to support player and coach development. So what can we learn from the videos that we're taking in order to help our players to get better? Because sometimes we can't see it when we're in the moment. As coaches, if some of you coach as well, I know I'm always guilty of this. I have a picture in my mind after the game of how it went. And the story I've told myself is we were excellent, or we weren't very good. Sometimes when I rewatch a game on video, that story I've told myself isn't actually accurate because all of the passion and emotions that happened in the moment aren't what I'm seeing. And there's a lot I can take out of that that can help my team get better and help me get better as a coach. So what are we doing as an organization to be able to maximize all of this great technology support that we have in 2021? So for me, that's what the best possible environment means. And again, as I said at the beginning, I've thrown a lot of information at you. I'm sure you've got 1,000,001 questions. So one of the things that I wanted to kind of consolidate at the end is, what do I want you to take out of this presentation? And more importantly, what are the things that I want you to take away to make sure that you've got the right questions to be able to ask, to make sure you're finding the right environments for your sons or daughters? Because as human beings, we go to people that we trust and that we believe have expertise to help us make important decisions. So if we have a medical question, we'll go to a doctor. If we have a question about a legal concept, we may go to a lawyer. If we have questions about soccer environments, we're going to go to people who we believe have an authority in that area and that we trust to be able to guide us in the right way. Unfortunately, in the Canadian system, prior to having these standards in place, sometimes those people that we believe have expertise may guide us toward what benefits them as compared to what benefits the players and our sons and daughters who we want to support to have the best possible experience. The way we counteract that is we ask the right questions. In the same way, if you go to a car shop and your car's broken down, if you don't know anything about cars, as I don't, and you don't know where to start the conversation with the mechanic, you're going to take them at face value that these are the types of things that your car needs. Hopefully, most of them have strong ethics and they're telling you the right things and guiding you in the right direction so you can make an informed decision. Sometimes there may be people that push you towards things that you might not need, things that your car doesn't need, or things that might be an option or might be optional because it's going to push you to spend more money and provide more business to them. So soccer is no different. But if we have the right information and we're able to ask the right questions, hopefully that's going to inform your decision and give you the right information to be able to go away, discuss it as a family, decide what's right for you and your children, and make the right decisions on an environment that's going to create the right experience for your children, which is ultimately what we're after. So what are those takeaway messages and good parent questions? So big takeaway here is when we talk about best with best, for me, it speaks to the environment. We want good environments playing alongside each other. So every organization that participates in the PDP has what's called the National Youth Club License. So they've met a series of 142 criteria or are working towards meeting 142 criteria that demonstrate that they have infrastructure, they have administrative practices, they have good governance, they have strong technical programming, and they have good financial practices that are going to allow them to provide that environment that's going to support player development. So some questions that you might think about as a parent when you want to ask questions about what environment is provided for your child, what supports are in place, and what does the club believe in? And I'll talk a little bit about principles in a second, but what are you all about as a club and what do you want me to know? And if that pitch begins with how good the team will be or how many trophies we're going to have an opportunity to win, that may be a flag to you to be cautious about what that club or what that individual is focused on. Because remember, team success is not the same thing as individual player development. Aligned with that, we believe strongly that with more quality clubs, more qualified coaches running more great programs, it means we're going to have more quality players over time. And I use this analogy all the time and linking back to the school system. If we had a challenge in Canada with the number of quality students that we have, we wouldn't create just a few really good schools and filter all the smart students into those ones and leave everybody else behind. What we would do is invest in training more good teachers. We would create more good schools with more good classrooms so that we can develop more good students. And it's the same thing in soccer. More good clubs, more good coaches, more good environments mean that we're going to be able to develop more good players, which is good for our leagues because we'll be able to have more meaningful competition. It's good for our clubs because they'll be able to field teams at appropriate levels of participation. And it's good for all of you because you know you've got options. And again, same analogies I keep using over and over again. If we were going to compare our National Youth Club license organizations to cars, we'd be shopping in the luxury automobile area because they've met some standards and they're demonstrating their quality. But even within that area, there's different types of options you might have. You might choose to go for a Mercedes or a BMW or a Lexus or an Acura or any number of different cars because there's something about that vehicle that appeals to you. So they're all meeting a minimum standard to be considered within that luxury automobile classification, which makes them different from a Kia or a Hyundai or a Honda. But they're all different still, and there's different things that you might look for. So some of the things you might ask about your club is, how does your club develop players? What's your player development system? How do you go about making sure that my individual player, son or daughter, is going to get better? What feedback can I expect to receive from you? Because that's a part of the process. I need to know the areas where I need to continue to put work in, or the areas where I'm excelling and doing really well. You know, what does a typical training session look like? How do you deliver your on-field component? How does your team play? What are the principles of play on the field that you like to see going on? And more importantly, because there's one of the beauties of soccer is there's so many different ways to play the game, but why does your team play like that? Dig a little bit deeper and start to ask some questions about what the club is able to offer and what they're willing to provide and how they go about doing that. Another important piece, and again, I've talked a lot about creating the environment. So for me, if the AYSL is the same environment that's always existed, but we're just pulling all of the better players together, I think we're failing. So remember what we just described and spent a bit of time on around what does the best environment possible mean. So you might think about asking questions like, what does the periodized plan for the club look like? Am I going to have these rest periods where maybe my child might play a different sport or, you know, take a different interest so they maintain that passion for soccer? Do I know that the players are looked after and that we're not overtraining, we're not over competing, we're giving them an opportunity to be able to have a properly periodized plan that doesn't overlap? Tell me a little bit about your sports science and medicine supports. What do you do for mental skills training? How often might we see a physical trainer? Or what's your plan for if my child gets hurt? How do we get them back on the field, and what support are you going to provide? How does your club use technology to support player development? Can I expect to see video work? Can I expect to have homework where maybe I'm doing some individual review and learning in that way? How are we using all of these tools available to us? So essentially, how are we making sure that that environment that we create for our players is as good as it can possibly be and better than what we've seen before? Because that really is the differentiation between a standards-based league and what's existed in the past, which is not necessarily an inferior competition, but didn't have the same level of standards throughout and didn't have the same focus on creating the best environment possible because the focus was on how many games we can win so that we can demonstrate that we belong at this competitive tier or this competitive level. And the last thing here that I think is important to take away is success is a long-term sustainable system change. And again, that term long-term. So we want this to be something that's going to live with us long-term. In the same way the LTPD has guided the development of those players that are now representing us on a national stage and in professional environments, we want the legacy here to be better club environments where it's sustainable long-term so that more players get access to quality environments than what we had in the past. So remember when I talked a little bit about the measures of success. So changing the measures is the way that we change behaviors. So at the end of the day, we want to change those measures of success towards things like, are we attracting players to the game? Are we retaining them? So are they playing the game long-term? Are we progressing them, which means are they reaching higher levels of play, and are we encouraging them to pursue their potential? Are we transitioning them? So some players may end up being, you know, like myself, not able to represent Canada or play professionally, even though that was my dream, but maybe there's some other things and other ways that I can contribute to the system. So are there opportunities for your sons or daughters to get involved in coaching or refereeing, or maybe think about some of the administrative parts that power our system? So all of those things are much better measures of quality than the result of an individual game or the result of a competition. The other piece that's really important to ask your organizations, because they've all made this commitment, is how are we living our principles? Because these behaviors are the things that underskirt or underpin everything that we do in a club licensing perspective. So we believe that if organizations do these things well, that's what good youth sport looks like. So they prioritize fun. They emphasize physical, mental, and emotional safety, because safety is a non-negotiable for us. We need to create safe environments from all aspects for our players. They provide developmentally appropriate, high-quality programs, which we talked about, that environment. They maximize attraction. They look after personal, holistic personal development, which means the whole person, not just the soccer player. They want to focus on helping players reach the highest levels of play, not holding them back so we can win competitions. And we want long-term engagement. We want players to continue to contribute to the game long-term. We want to be focused on participant-centered decision-making, which again, what I talked about, the individual player development. So the participant, the player, should be the most important thing when we're thinking about decisions, not the team, not the club, not my career as a technical director, as a coach. Or as a coach, we want to foster accessible, inclusive, and welcoming environments. So we want to get as many people involved in our game as possible. And once they're involved, we want them to feel that sense of belonging so that they want to stay. And finally, we want to act as a good corporate and community citizen. So the community citizenship side is we want organizations that are seen as something bigger than just soccer providers. They're ingrained in their communities. They're things that the community can't live without. And in return, the community supports them in ways that are meaningful. And good corporate citizenship is we're playing nice in the sandbox. We're not spending our time recruiting players from other people's backyard, as I've talked about in my example. We're focused on developing the players from our community and those that want to be a part of our programming. So I know recruitment is an area that within the Alberta and Calgary soccer system is something that's been a part of the lived experience for years and years and years. That needs to change. We need to focus on developing the players that are a part of our system, not harvesting those that have been developed by somebody else. So going back to what we're looking for from our PDP programs, it's not who can collect the best talent. It's who can develop the most quality players over time and who can help those players to stay engaged in the system and reach higher levels of play. So that's me. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for the time. Hopefully I answered some of your questions. I'm sure I've maybe added more than what you had in advance. So hopefully I'll be able to answer some of those now. And thankfully have Jordan and John with me who will be able to answer all the questions that I can't or take on all the questions that I've now created for them through this presentation. So appreciate the time. I know it's a lot of information in a fairly condensed kind of time frame here, but I hope it was valuable. And I hope you're not all sleeping behind your cameras. And again, thank you, and very happy to answer any questions, unless Jordan or John, there's anything that you wanted to add.
I'm not too sure if my mic is still on. Dave, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me at all?
Yeah,
excellent.
Gotcha.
There was a couple of great questions and some dialogue within the chat box, which was really nice. And I'm just trying to scroll up here and find one. The person was technical director, so clearly a bit of a veil of secrecy there. Who knows who said technical director is? A very ominous figure within the chat right now. But I'm just trying to find it here. It says, what would be a more accurate statement? The PDP will be a better performance league, or the PDP will be a better environment league? So I'll open that up to both John and Dave in terms of thoughts around that. And I know that you've touched on pieces of that, Dave, but to try and get down to the crux of what the AYSL and PDP programs are.
Great question, and it's great to hear that a technical director is involved and is asking for that information. I'm not sure whether it's someone who's already a part of this environment, maybe in the future, or is just looking to make sure that they're able to provide the right information to players within their organization. So, for me, I think it would be more accurate to say that it's a better development or a better environment league. as compared to a better performance league. So as I mentioned in kind of our stream-based model there, we don't even talk about performance as being the important component until we get to senior soccer, where it really is about how you perform on the field. And you'll be seeing, some of you anyway, men's and women's national team, it's about the performance and the result at that level, because that's the only thing that matters. CPL, that as well. We're heading into now university college seasons right now. That creeps into that sphere as well, where the performance on the field is really important. For me, within those youth environments, it's always about the development of the individual player. If you're talking about performance in terms of the process, so how a team plays on the day versus their performance in terms of the result and the score, I think you could make a case that that's an important piece. Are we playing the game the right way? Are we taking the principles that we worked on in training and applying them in our game environment? But for me, it's really about creating more good environments for players ahead of what does the game look like on a Saturday, and is it a higher caliber? Would this team beat a team that's playing, tier 1, or a team that's playing tier 2 or tier 3 for that matter? It's less about that and more about creating an environment that's going to develop more players to fulfill their potential.
Yeah, if I can come in quickly, Dave and John. I addressed it and said it is about the environment. I've been out to some of the games and parents have talked about game time. And I've seen it in the box. How much game time is a child getting? And I'm asking the true evaluation. So I think the word performance is misleading, and maybe we should say the environment leads to development that will lead to performance. And one of the things that I'll ask for any parent looking at the right environment is to not ask what happens in game day, but what is happening in the week building up to game day. Jordan's putting about the social mix and how your child feels in that environment. Do they like their coach? These are important considerations, I think, for when we're looking at the right club to go to. It's not so much the outcome on the day. So it was a great question, and I think the environment is key, and then development. What is your child gaining from being in that environment?
100%. I see that there's some hands raised. I put in the chat there that, so we're not going to be unmuting anyone, but I would encourage you to type in to the chat box with your questions, just so we can be really efficient with this and get some good clarity. There's another question that's come in here. It says, even though performance isn't the main target, will it be a more competitive league than a tier 1 league? Who wants to take a first swing at that one?
I can start. I think it depends on what you mean by more competitive. If you're talking about more competitive as in, will there be more meaningful competition, which is kind of the way I was describing, more games that are evenly matched, more opportunities to play against teams of similar quality. I think because of the ability to do things like competitive streaming, which is altering your schedule to allow teams that are more evenly matched to play each other more often, I would hope you would see more competitive games than you might in a tier 1, where the structure of the league and the competition is fairly well set. You play everybody a balanced number of times, twice or 4 times or 6 times or whatever it is, regardless of whether in advance this team is 10 goals better than mine. If you're asking, will it be more competitive as in, will the teams be better on the field than the teams in tier 1? I think in the short term, it really depends on what the player development process has been up to this point. So obviously, if there isn't a high caliber group of under 14s, all of a sudden there isn't going to be magically a top tier under 15 team. If we've done the right things up to this point, there should be high quality players within that environment. And again, I would think, and this is from my experience more so than anything, that players generally gravitate towards the highest environments, the highest recognition, those types of challenges. So generally, the players that want to train 3 times a week, that want to put the work in the gym from a physical training perspective, that want to put the work into their mental skills and support in that way, are probably the ones that are more dedicated, maybe have more ability. But we need to recognize as well that a PDP AYSL environment isn't for everyone. And there's going to be good players that don't want to be a part of these programs for whatever reason. And that's fine. They've taken a different journey, and as I didn't mention and should have in that pathway diagram, the little chevrons between the different streams are meant to show that there's always going to be fluidity of movement within that. There may be players that right now don't see the PDP as a viable option or the right option for them, but may move into that environment in the future, or vice versa. So there's always going to be movement. So it depends a little bit on what you define as, will it be more competitive? If you're asking us, will the teams be better? I think it's hard to tell. I would hope that there would be high quality teams in this environment because of the level of coaching, the level of the clubs that are involved. But if you were just playing, a little tournament, for example, would the AYSL teams always beat a tier 1 team? I don't know. I'm sure there's some very good tier 1 teams that probably would get results in some of those environments.
And I think to that, Dave, the league is a piece of the overall environment that these clubs that have achieved a National Youth Club license get access to. Right? This is a way to say an objective criteria that these clubs are offering these standards, and this is the environments that they're creating, so they're able to put groups into the AYSL. And as you've said, it's not for every child, it's not for every family, it's not for every person. So there's a decision to be made there, and hopefully we've given some information that will provide a better decision to be made, right? There's another question here. Two of them I'm going to combine into one. It says, I'd like to confirm what clubs are performing intake within the 07 age group, and can we get a straight answer before the combine this week on exactly how many 07 teams there actually is in Calgary? Because I see some clubs advertising 07 intake that I don't believe were AYSL licensed. So Dave, would you like to clear up any confusion? Would you like me to, in terms of who is a National Youth Club license holder within the province of Alberta right now?
Yeah, I can start on that, Jordan, and then it's possible there may be locally organizations that for whatever reason have elected not to put teams in this year. So you may know that, and I may not. But right now there are 7 licensed clubs in Calgary. So there are Foothills, Calgary Southwest United, Rangers, and Blizzard, who were the original 4 that were licensed. Licensed the following year were Eastside Memorial, Calgary Villains, and Calgary West. So right now there are 7 organizations that would be eligible to have teams within the AYSL that currently hold the National Youth Club license.
And just to speak further to that, because I know that this invite went out kind of across Alberta as well. There's 4 clubs as well within Edmonton, with the original 3. As you alluded to, the original 4 in Calgary. Those original 3 were St. Albert Impact, Sherwood Park Phoenix, and Edmonton Scottish. And then one additional one centering within the 07 age group of ISA FC as well. And the same process, Calgary and Edmonton for those clubs, or Edmonton area as well. There's a question here, so I'm just admitting someone else, and there's 2 or 3 questions coming through all at the same time. I love that. People are engaged now. They're hacking away messages. This is fantastic. John, would you like to handle the next one while I sort out this?
Yeah, I've got a question there on the calendar, and lots of people are asking when are the timelines. We are working very hard at the moment in terms of facilities. We're working across 5 districts, and we're in the middle of a pandemic, so everything has been a bit skewed. The 07s are coming in the fall. The 08s are we looking at in the spring, and then the 09s in the next fall. So we're working all the time to keep these calendars consistent. That's more for the league. The clubs will have access to running their programs as well. So again, I know there are a lot of questions that came in earlier on, and they're ready to be addressed by the clubs. So even things like jerseys, do the AYSL provide jerseys? They will be done by the clubs. The fees will also be set by the clubs. So if you're approaching a club or a team, it's worth going with those questions that you want to be answered by the club. And not every club is obviously going to use the same strength conditioning coach, nutritionist, or sports psychologist. So really, I really want to stress that You know, it's the same as when you're looking at a school for your child. Try and find the right fit for your child, and ask the relevant questions. And I hope that helps. Like I say, the calendar is being reviewed. As we know at the moment, we're back in masks. I'm really hoping not to put the blinders on it, but if we can keep this league going, it'll be fantastic, and that calendar will be continue to roll out. Another question.
Yeah, the next kind of question in here. So someone's actually texted me about 5 questions, so we'll get there eventually. From, again, like a block number. I love this. People are concerned, but sorry, as you keep typing, it keeps moving. So just give me 1 sec before you hit enter. There's a concern that adding additional team licenses, doesn't this dilute the league and create another tier 1 league with higher league fees? And there's 2 ways to look at that, really. So I think, speaking from a district point of view, the goal would be, as the sea rises, so do all the ships. So really, the emphasis is on the standards within the club, the standards in the training, and the standards within the environment, the coaching qualifications, the extra support that players have access to is really, really some of the key aspects of all of this. So from a district point of view, the more national youth club license holders there are, the better the overall health of our soccer community actually is. And so the concern about having more clubs having access to an AYSL competition is actually brilliant. We're giving more players a better quality environment, a better quality experience than what we had before, which is a win. It's a massive win. So this is a necessary step forward. And there was a question earlier that spoke to, as teams leave tier 1, what happens to tier 1? Well, naturally, there's a backfill effect. There's other kids that get a tier 1 experience. There's other supports that those kids get access to as well. And there's an emphasis in the club system to really be concentrating on their grassroots pool of players and to be servicing those players really, really, really well. And so diluting tier 1 is really looking through that lens of competition as the master rather than the servant, which is what Dave touched on earlier. I believe that competition, when done really well, adds tremendous value to the overall sport experience. But when it's not done really well, it can be that straw that breaks the camel back. So I know at CMSA, we're taking a really hard look at how our competition is structured at the tier 1, 2, 3, 4, and sometimes even 5 levels to make sure that those teams are placed appropriately, that they're having meaningful competition, and that their soccer experience is put first rather than trying to win a league or to get to a provincial competition.
Yeah,
so I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, if I can come on quickly with more licenses, the one thing to consider is with more licenses, you've got more qualified coaches and better programs for more children to go into. And I keep getting asked about players all the time. And I've said this to some of the clubs who are holding the license at the moment. Certainly myself, looking in from Alberta Soccer, and I'm sure David and Jordan are doing the same. We're not so much looking at the players, but the environment and the coaches that we're developing and creating this environment. The other key thing is that we are talking AYSL, and I really want to stress that if your child wishes to play tier 1 and they're happy there, we're not saying that they're not going to go and make the Calgary, FC Edmonton or Canada. That may be the place where they want. So again, it's looking at the school environment that you want to go into and does it fit your child. So we're not saying this is the only way that you're going to make a professional player. I want to make that clear because I keep hearing messages that clubs are saying this is the only way. And I think Dave's alluded to that. There's lots of players who are coming through as late bloomers. So I'm not trying to undersell what AYSL is about, but it's about coaches and players combining and creating that positive environment. Next question, Jordan.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. The next question is there an accountability framework in place that incorporates an audit and feedback mechanism to ensure clubs who have achieved the National Youth Club license maintain those standards? And Dave, I think that's a perfect question for you.
It's a great question and so important, and the answer is yes. So up to this point, and continuing in the future as well, clubs that have achieved the license and those that are hoping to achieve it in the future, they provide action plan updates every 6 months to Canada Soccer that are reviewed and feedback provided, and additional guidance in terms of things that they may need to work on over the 6 months after that, because there are some criteria that are still being implemented and are quite new. And then within that, there's a 2-year renewal process, and we're just in the process of going through that for the first time. We don't have all of the tools yet to be able to operationalize the vision of what that looks like, but the goal would be to borrow from the business world and take a 360 approach in terms of how we evaluate organizations and their quality. So it's a self-reflection, so the organization telling you how they've done against their own plans. It's a top-down review, which would be the districts, provinces, providing comment on how the organization is done. It's a bottom-up component, which would be folks like yourselves, players and parents, saying this is what the club is like from our experience as customers within the organization. And then the one that I think is a little bit maybe unique is a peer-to-peer component, where organizations will be asked to evaluate each other. And I think when we combine all of that information and all of those data points, you can start to extrapolate those organizations that really are living the behaviors and are good corporate citizens and are delivering against expectations, and maybe those that say the right thing or have nice documentation and aren't able to move that forward. And there are a few other provinces, as I mentioned earlier, that are a little bit ahead of where we are in Alberta right now. But I can tell you there are organizations in other provinces that are a little further along that have had organizations meet the standards and then have had their license removed or have lost the opportunity to be able to participate at that level subsequently because they haven't been able to maintain those standards. Some of them are organizations through their own self-reflection, where they've had to come back and say, we thought we could do this, we tried it short term, but we're not able to do this. It's causing us to not be able to focus on other elements of our club that are important, or we don't have the resources to continue to operate at this level. And they've voluntarily kind of withdrawn their licensing. And then we've got other organizations who just haven't been able to meet those expectations and have had their license removed. So the short answer to the question is yes. The longer answer is all of the things that I've just given to you in terms of what that looks like.
Thanks, Dave. I just want to provide a little more clarity on the 7 clubs and the age groups that they're operating at. So there seems to be a Calgary specific question. The original 4 clubs, Southwest, Blizzard, Foothills, Rangers, operate the 06s, right? They were in there. They will be grandfathered forever as the 06s. No other clubs will enter any 06s within the AYSL. The 3 new clubs that have come in terms of Calgary West, Eastside Memorial, and Calgary Villains, those will start at 07s along with the original 4. So 7 clubs will operate within the 07s. And then as long as they maintain their licenses, all 7 of those clubs would continue in with the 08s. And all 7 would continue in with the 09s as long as licenses are maintained and no additional licenses are achieved through any other clubs. As a club achieves a license, they intake with the next group. So say another club was approved next year, they would start in with the 09s, right? Because the deadlines are August 31st for intake within those environments. There's a question here: when will the players find out if and for what team they have been selected in terms of timeline? This could be a club-specific question, so you would have to check in with your club. If this is a question within the combine that CMSA is running over the next 2 Saturdays, what we will do in terms of process is sit down with all of the clubs at the end of the 2nd Saturday. So September 18th, we'll sit down with them, and players that the clubs are really interested in, they'll have a bib number and a color that says, we really liked 21 black, for instance. And so then what we'll do is we'll look on that player's registration for the combine, and they've ranked the clubs that they're most interested in. So if that club that likes them is that player's first choice, we'll connect them, right? We will connect those players. We'll make sure to reach out to the home club's technical director as well before we do that to say, hey, Club A is interested in player A, and look to facilitate that. Because if that's an interest for that player, the player has a right to choose the environment that's best for them. And that they believe is going to help them in their journey. So the timelines for that will fall also into an open contact period after that. So you would probably have some people reaching out to you late September, early October through this process. It'll take a little bit of time, but we will get there. The next question is, can AYSL teams travel and compete in tournaments? John, would you like to have a crack at that one?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing to consider is that we are with the clubs developing a periodized program, and we've seen it already. And there's lots of people considering the best options for the children. If you're playing in this program, we want rest periods for the players. We don't want them going through a hard AYSL season and then going off to San Diego for a big showcase event. So again, it's going to depend upon the clubs, but the onus from ourselves is to take those rest periods for the children to recover, maybe try and do another activity or another sport. There will be, hopefully, again, and maybe Dave can talk to this a little bit, the Tier 1 clubs will be able to compete within the national championships, and there are hopes to build competitions like that for the High Performance League, the player development program. So there are going to be, we're rolling out, we're still in our first season with the AYSL. So I think it's important that we need to consider the workload that the players and the clubs, because we've got to also consider these commitments are for the coaches as well. We've got to consider these commitments that we're taking on. So I know the traditional pattern has been, let's get through the league and get to as many tournaments as possible so our children can go and seek scholarships. I promise you, with the AYSL, we've got the Vancouver Whitecaps coming in next week to look at players. Canada Soccer will be coming in and viewing these players as well. So there's going to be opportunities, rather than saying that we want children traveling across North America to Europe for tournaments. So again, a lot of that will be a club-based decision, but the idea of the periodized program is to safeguard your child's recovery and development.
And I think to that, there's another question here, John, about the structure of the AYSL in regards to competition length and periodization. And so the AYSL follows the PDP guidelines set out by Canada Soccer in terms of competition or matches spread across 40 to 44 weeks. Dave, correct me if I'm wrong right now, but I'm fairly confident those are the numbers. 40 to 44 weeks per year. And within that, the AYSL competitive season is looking to have 20 matches across that. So 20 11v11 matches across that. And obviously, given the climate of Alberta, we know that there's snow on the ground for anywhere between 6 to 11 months of the year. There is an indoor development component where the clubs will be playing in a 9v9 format. That's been confirmed, and more regionalized within the winter time to alleviate the necessity to travel up and down slippery Highway 2 to go up and down for a match. So more regionalized in the indoor portion. It's been confirmed that it's going to be an 8-game developmental kind of season for the indoor component. So you're looking at 28 games essentially over 40 to 44 weeks every single calendar year. Not if someone else approves of that or along the same lines, John or Dave.
Yeah, that's what we're looking at for the league play. Obviously, like I said, there may be some tournament play within the AYSL. So in addition to that, what Jordan's talking about is game time. And as we've said, game time, and I've used the analogy before, game time is the icing on the cake. What we're trying to do is develop players. So what goes under that icing? And that's the consideration. We've seen it before. And again, I've been involved in provincial programs where we really stack up the training to get players into these competitions, and they get there and they're tired. So that's a key consideration in development. The game time, I keep saying it, is the icing on the cake. What are we going to do? What environment are we doing to create better players?
Yeah, and then along to that periodization piece is mandated rest periods and blackout periods where players are given the opportunity, coaches even are given the opportunity, and club staff are given the opportunity to rest and recover and have a bit of a family life or just repair the body a little bit. So those breaks are within the competition period and then outside of the competition period as well. There's another question here. It says, it's a hypothetical. So hypotheticals are never really that hypothetical. So it's probably completely factual. It says, what if 3 clubs want a player or goalkeeper? Will he automatically be on his first choice team, or could he choose between these 3 teams afterwards? So I think this question's along the lines of the combine. So just because that player has chosen a club, that club could already have, say, 3 goalkeepers within their club, right? And within that team and within their depth of players. So they might not actually be needing a goalkeeper or a player, hypothetically in this case, at that club. So this isn't just an allocation. This is not a sign up and you eventually get put onto your preferred club. This is a way to centralize scouting so that families are not driving around Calgary trying to lie to club saying, he's sick tonight with COVID, but he'll be at training tomorrow, just so they can go from one club tryout to the next. To centralize that, so we're bringing the clubs to one spot, and then to also help out the clubs to say, what are your needs, and how can you as clubs actually work together to, again, promote a competitive balance within the league, and to say, well, we really need a goalkeeper. Our player pool is quite weak within, or quite low within the goalkeeper position. We'd love a goalkeeper. Great. You should go and approach this player and see if there's a fit there within your environment and program. So I want to be just really, really, really clear about that.
There was a quick one, Jordan, just from earlier that I just had a quick scroll through the chat there, and most of them it looked like were answered either by yourself or by John, but there was one about the expertise of coaches at younger ages, and I know it's not as applicable maybe to this group unless you have younger siblings that are in that age, which is why I didn't touch on that at all. But within that grassroots kind of component up to the age of 12, there's another program called Skill Centers, which is a component of what licensed organizations need to provide, and essentially it's creating standards-based higher level environments for players from 8 to 12, but not selection-based. So it's not about identifying the best 10 8-year-olds and giving them all of the opportunity. It's about creating an environment where as many grassroots players as possible can get access to good quality coaching. And there was a question about kind of within that same question around traditionally or typically we have parent coaches providing most of the coaching at those younger ages, and then all of a sudden we get to the AYSL level and they're no longer at the standard, so they're replaced by these experts. How come these experts aren't more involved earlier on, or how come we're not training the coaches to be able to maintain that expertise as they move into those older ages? And I would say both of those things are true. So through the Skill Center program, the idea is to bring more expertise into those grassroots ages. So similar to the youth license that I talked about with the AYSL, there's also a children's license, which is providing the expertise for working with players up to the age of 12 that has an assessment component. And it's the first time we've ever had, from a Canada soccer perspective, any training like that. For those of you who may be coaches or technical directors, you may have gone through, a B license or an A license. None of the content on those workshops have anything to do with coaching kids. They're about coaching senior professionals in the 11-a-side game, phase of plays and functional type training environments. That's not appropriate for working with younger players. So there's now a course or a workshop specifically for those players. There's also, in support of that, for your parent coach who may not want to go through and take higher level training and make that level of commitment, we have a revamped grassroots or community stream workshops that has an online theory component and an on-field practical. And as well, as I mentioned earlier, all of the clubs that are licensed at the National Youth Club license caliber or category all have to have internal coach development plans. So their technical leadership, their coach development experts should be working with those volunteer parent coaches to help continue to grow their skills and continue to move them forward if that's what they want, with the use of things like personal development plans and mentorship opportunities. So I don't think I'm saying, and I don't think John or Jordan would say this either, that we don't need parent coaches and we want to push people out that have been great contributors to the game. We want people to have the appropriate training, and we want them to have the ability to understand the players that they're working with and provide the best possible environment, starting with those grassroots players, because that's ultimately how we solve all of the challenges about, are there enough players at under 13, or are we diluting the player pool, or what's going to happen with tier 1. If we do a better job of developing more players and keeping more of them interested from that 8 to 12, there's going to be more quality players that are going to be able to filter into those different environments and support development there. So speaking personally, I actually believe that that's more important than the AYSL component, because if we do those things well, if we develop a lot of really good players from 8 to 12, and we have, as an example, there's 100 players in that environment, can we develop 15 or 20 of them that have the caliber or the quality to play at a reasonable level, a tier 1 or an AYSL type of thing? Well, that makes everything else a little bit easier, because now we don't need to go and find players and recruit and have combines, other than for those that are maybe outside that are looking for opportunities. So I think for me, that part is actually more critical than what we do with the 15-year-olds. Even though we want to make sure they have the right environments to continue their development, what we've done up to that point has a lot bigger impact on their journey than what happens at 15 or 17.
And to your point, Dave, some of the analysis that I've done within the Calgary region is clubs will need a player pool of between 85 and 104, give or take about 10 players either side of that, but 85 to 104 players in their player pool at U7 to U9 to have one U17 team, given our current attrition rates right now. So if we think about that, you're 100% spot on. Like, the better coaches equals better players piece starts at our youngest age groups, because if we're having that level of attrition even to there, there's the bigger problem is there as well. So I love that the skill centers have been brought in to be able to standardize that and to, again, raise the level of the training that players are getting at younger age groups as well.
If I can just add to that, and most people who may know me, for the parents as well, I'm the manager of grassroots. So even before skill centers, Dave's working with me. We're bringing in the standards very soon. We've got our first club hopefully going to achieve these standards in the next few weeks. We're trying to bring in qualified parent coaches as well, and it's a journey of development for them. So if we've got a parent who's passionate about soccer and wants to go into the grassroots program, we want to encourage them to create a safe environment. So there's police checks. So when you put your children in sport in the future, they're in a safe and fun, inclusive environment. And I keep saying this, and I truly mean it. The parents of young children today are more important than Dave, Jordan, and myself combined, because you're the parents that are going to take the game forward, not even the technical directors at the AYSL clubs. So we've got to look to develop the game for the future, and that starts with that education from the very young ages. So when we are getting challenged that why do I need to take a coaching certificate, it's because we want to create that environment, even in the young Timbit soccer. And the other key for me to point out here is when we're looking at coaching active start, which is U6 children, we're not talking about playing 4-4-2 or Christmas tree formation. We're talking about how to engage children of 5 years of age so that they nurture that passion and love to play. And as John said there, the more children we get coming back in from the pandemic, the more chance we've got that they're going to stay in the sport. And it's not to say that soccer may be their sport. there may be other sports, but we need to get children active and back playing sport. And the best way to do that is with coaches who are passionate and knowledgeable about what they're delivering.
You can certainly tell what strikes a chord with the three of us, right? Like we could probably go on for another hour with that topic. I'm going to zoom into the next question.
I just wanted to touch on it because it was the one that I noticed in the chat. So apologize because that may not be relevant to a lot of people that have just older kids or their youngest is in this AYSL age. But I noticed it wasn't answered. I'll grab one more, Jordan, that hits really close to home for me, if you don't mind. And maybe it was the one you were going to go to around relative age effect and developmental age. So I don't know whether the two of you wanted to speak about that from a rules and regs perspective, but the reason that hits home for me is I have a daughter who is 9 and was born December 22nd. So she is in that relative age effect bubble where she is a year younger than some of the girls that are playing in the same soccer programs or in the same class. So I can appreciate fully how much of a difference that makes, especially at young ages. And then similar to relative age effect, but developmental age, I have a 12-year-old who is smaller than my 9-year-old, and she is the smallest on my under 11 team. So he's playing under 13 with some boys that are taller than I am, and he's smaller than my 9-year-old, and comes up to about here on some of the boys he's playing with. And I'm looking at it and going, it's kind of at a point now where, what chance do you have when it's 5 of your steps for one of your opponents? So it's an area that I hope there's some consideration on, because really it's about creating the right environment for the player. I look at my own kids and go, would my 12-year-old be better suited playing with 10 and 11-year-olds where he's not so far behind physically, where he might give himself a little bit more of a chance, and will there come a point where my December baby might be better suited playing with the kids that are a year younger because they're closer in age to her than the kids that are January, February birthdays in her own birth year. So the reason I bring that up is the personal component to it, and I hope that that's something that can be considered under the rules, both within an AYSL and even extending that into other environments, because there's certainly relative age effect that would impact tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 players, as well as developmental age that would impact those things. And I know in Saskatoon, where I live, that process is already in place, where all you need to do is put forward, basically an application that says, here's why I'd like my child to play with younger players, and it's a fairly straightforward process that, as far as I'm aware anyway, is not often denied, and it's helped kids that maybe would have left the game because they were struggling to compete physically because they just are late developers, or they were struggling to compete because they are, and we do have this, and there's an automatic consideration for December birthdays to play down with kids a year younger if they so choose. So I wanted to take that one because it's something that gets me going a little bit, as maybe you could tell.
Yeah, so I think, I'll speak from a local perspective. So in Calgary, I'm not going to speak on behalf of AYSL right now, but in Calgary, what we're trying to do is to create a process where biobanding can occur. So biobanding is the process of grouping kids based on their developmental maturation rather than the chronological maturation of them. So as Dave's alluded to, the 12-year-old could actually be a 10-year-old, physically, maybe even mentally, socially, emotionally, right? And so allowing those players to play in the right environments, there's a tension within that, because you have to have a lot of trust in the clubs and in the coaches to do the right thing. So the culture in and around the game has to be right to say, go and play a 12-year-old in a 10-year-old league. No problem. And to not have parents be up in arms, not have opponent coaches, not have referees confused about why this child who's overage is playing in this game or in this league or in this environment. So there's a tension there that is formed when that trusting relationship is not put first, and when the actual developmental activity is not put first within the coach's intent. So what we've tried to do in Calgary is explore two different things. One of them is to begin the process of having 16-month age groups. And this is actually stolen from volleyball, where, as you could imagine, the relative age effect plays a massive factor in success on the court. And so players that are in the last 4 months of the year can just freely play down in the other age group. No doctor's notes, no peak height velocity tests, nothing like that. So making it really simple and saying, we trust you, clubs, do the right thing, or you won't get access to it anymore. And I'll speak to that on a CMSA perspective. On an AYSL perspective, if we speak about putting development of players first and making sure that the environment is right for them, things like relative age effect have to be taken into consideration within the rules. There has to be dispensation and compensation allowed for things like that. And the realities is we aren't there right now because this was just developed, just launched. But this is one of those pieces that as you build it and as you realize that there's a necessity for it, that gets built into it as this league evolves and grows and really develops into serving the appropriate purpose. So 100%, it's already on the radar, and I believe it's something that will be addressed sooner rather than later. Another question here is just, can Edmonton teams expect more travel time given the additional teams in Calgary? We try to have a balanced travel schedule so that we're not having the Edmonton teams, travel 15 out of the 20 games per se, and the Calgary teams only travel 5. So it's a balanced travel schedule. We try to find those periods when highways and where weather is really, really optimal. There's standards in terms of the fields that have to be booked when teams are traveling. So you won't end up on a grass pitch traveling to Calgary, only to find out in Red Deer that it's raining in Calgary and the field has been closed, and thus you have to turn around and completely waste your Saturday. So there's measures put in place that the facility standard for this league is higher than one would expect in Tier 1. And the facilities haven't gotten a massive makeover. They've been used for Tier 1, but what will happen is the facility standards for AYSL will start to encroach on some of those Tier 1, Tier 2 leagues, and look to make sure that the right facility is there for the right game. I'm not saying that the Tier 1 and Tier 2s will be pushed to fields that look like the surface of the moon, but what I am saying is that there are standards for the facilities built into the AYSL. There's another question here that says, I'm curious about the costs associated with this opportunity and what, if any, measures are being put in place to avoid access being limited based on affordability. So costs are determined by the club, right? So each club is different. They will offer different things within the same criteria. So it's your job as a parent to really ask those questions and say, what am I actually getting? What is this costing? And what are the kind of standards around all of those programs and the program that I'm joining into? In terms of measures being put in place to essentially be inclusive and accessible to some families who might not have the financial means to participate in this. John, would you like to address that?
Yeah, I mean, and Dave can support it. All the clubs achieving the National Youth Club license have met, I think it's over 140 criteria, and one of them is that they develop a hardship fund. And it's not just a case of kids sport. We want to encourage as many children to play the game and make it accessible. So that's one of the criteria that we will be looking at the clubs is, can they make this accessible? So yeah, there are costs that are going to be associated with it. The question has been asked about the difference between Tier 1 and AYSL, and I feel most of us as parents go back to how we were coached when we were children. It was normally one parent coach standing on the sideline barking out instructions. That's going to change, and I'm not saying that's Tier 1, but that's changed. What we're providing is a totally different environment, so there are costs associated with it. If a club does experience that, and we've seen players who have been sponsored or funded, we're looking at ways that the clubs can support that hardship fund to make it accessible to everyone. I don't know if you've got anything to add on to that, Dave.
Just maybe quickly, John, and I think that's a great kind of piece of the club licensing program. One of the principles, obviously, is around accessibility, inclusion, and creating welcoming, diverse environments. And yeah, all of the clubs are required to have financial supports in place. And I get this question a lot. There's a tension between high quality and high cost. And what tends to happen is it's called in systems theory, it's called a paradox. And what happens is we bounce back and forth. So we start off, we're running recreational program, low cost, low quality, and then eventually we end up with a point where the players, the families within those environments, maybe they want a little bit more. They want maybe to train or go to tournaments or these types of things, and then the cost starts to go up. And then we end up in a situation where the cost becomes too much. So what happens is an organization then decides they need to strip out all the standards in order to bring the cost down, because the things that they're doing cost money. And then we end up back at a spot where we have low cost, low quality. And then eventually we want more. That's just this kind of tension where we swing back and forth between the two. And what we're trying to say to organizations is, can we ask the question a little bit differently? How can we have high quality programs that are accessible and inclusive? Not how do we choose between providing quality and providing accessible and inclusive programs. And that's part of that creativity around creating funding opportunities. Some of them, they would all have access to things like Kids Sport and Jumpstart, which is kind of a universal piece, but generally that would be quite low in terms of the contributions those programs would make to a program like the AYSL. At least from my experience, maybe in Alberta, Kids Sport and Jumpstart are a little more generous. I know in most areas of the country, it's basically they'll cover part of whatever the lowest cost program is. But the clubs then are in a position where they're able to step forward and be able to provide that financial support. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but that is something that is considered, and it's something that clubs are required to have as a part of their programming, because we recognize that as you add quality, as you add sports science and technology and higher level coaches and better facilities and higher caliber referees and travel, all of these things add cost. And what we want to try to ensure as best we can anyway is that players that want the opportunity to play in these environments can have them regardless of financial needs. So it's always a challenge, certainly, and it's not something that I think any of us have an answer to until we get to a point where there's ample funding at every level and everything is offered for free, which I know would be the dream for all of us, but unfortunately is probably not going to be seen at any point in any of our lifetimes anyway.
But again, I think that's a key question that parents can go in. Like, do you have a funding scheme as a club? Tell me about that. Like, what does that look like? I think that's a really key question as well. Kind of this last one here, and then I'll get into my few phone questions that have come through. And then I'd love to kind of shut it down for the evening, because I know everyone's given up a lot of their time. There's still 90 odd people on the call, which blows my mind. So thank you for staying on and sticking with us. But just says something about the intake for the AYSL is ongoing for each birth year, or is there just one chance for that intake? So it's split up the same way as every other league would be in terms of your U14s, your U15s, et cetera, et cetera. And those age groups have got intakes all the time. What we're doing in Calgary, at least, with the centralization of that kind of recruiting and scouting activity, is just to make it simple. It's kind of an intake process, but it's not the only intake process, right? This happens on a regular basis, but we are focusing on that next age group and that next intake. So the next combine, we'd focus on the 08s, because eventually we won't have the facilities, the staff to run a combine at every single age group for all the clubs, and the calendar will be way, way, way too filled. So we're focusing on that U14 age group that's coming in every single time to make sure that we centralize that and make it as easy for families and clubs as possible. Anything to
That fluidity and that opportunity to enter in at different developmental times is so important, because there's going to be players that, maybe are outstanding, 100% committed at 14, that by 16, either have lost interest or haven't developed in the way that they want to, and they want to take a different journey in terms of a pathway, and others that may not have that profile at a young age. And I shared this story, personal story of mine at the combine last year, looking around at some of the players and then looking at the age, and I said to them, at this age, so obviously there's a lot of anxiety around this from parents and players about, am I going to get picked, am I going to get there, and if I don't, what happens? So I thought it was kind of relevant from that side. So when I was young, there was nothing in my athletic profile that would have demonstrated or would have indicated that I was going to play at any kind of level. So I said to the parents there, if I was out on the field in this environment, I wouldn't have been one of the ones that any of these clubs were identifying. I wouldn't have been the one that said, yeah, I really like blue number 3. It would have been, I would have been one of the ones that was sent back. And that was kind of my journey where, I wasn't a part of my citywide team the first time I tried out at 10. I got in there eventually at 11 and kind of held on as a squad player. I went in Ontario, we had a regional type setup. So I went to my regional team program to try out, didn't make it the first time at 14, and went back and played on my city team with the second tier players, and eventually kind of found my way into that environment. When I was 17 years old, I was playing local men's Division II soccer. And yeah, I had a good coach and it was a really good environment. So that's why I played there. But that was my playing environment. I was playing men's local Div 2 soccer. I wasn't on a provincial team. I wasn't on, I wasn't in, there was no PDL at the time, but I wasn't at that level of play at all. And, 2 years later, I was a first-year university player, starting as a true freshman ahead of a player who was a year older and was the captain of the provincial team a year older than me at the same time, and went on to be a starter and kind of a 90-minute player on a team that won a U Sport national championship and the captain of a team that was ranked number 1 in the country. But had you looked at me at 14, 15, even 17, I don't know that anyone would have went, yeah, that's the journey this player is going to take. And then from there, I played in the kind of semi-pro league at the time in Ontario for another 3 or 4 years. And that was kind of the end of my journey. And I would say I was one that probably maximized my athletic gifts more through determination than through ability. But certainly there's a lot of anxiety that goes with that intake. And I can tell you, I still have and carry, 35 now, my goodness, years later. I remember being lined up on the line and told I wasn't good enough at 9 years old. I remember being told again I wasn't good enough at 14. I remember, all of these feelings, and I can tell you that's not the end of the journey. And if your son, daughter loves to play, finds the right environment, and has that commitment, has that ability, they'll find their way. Whether they're selected at 14 to go into an AYSL program right now, or whether that happens later on in their journey, if they stick with their belief and they continue to work, they're going to have that opportunity. And that's one of the reasons why, that intake and ongoing opportunity processes is so important, because we do develop at different rates. And there's still, players that are going to look great at under 17 and not be there at under 20. There's going to be players that look great at under 20 that don't translate it into a men's or women's national team. There's going to be players at the club level that you think, yeah, that's the one and can't possibly miss, that don't make it. So that importance of recognizing the marathon, not the sprint, and supporting your child in the decisions that they want to make, whether that be moving into an AYSL environment or staying in the environment that they're happy with, as I know John presented before. So it's always a journey, and everybody's journey is different. It's one of the challenges with using the word pathway, because it makes it seem like it's this, straight line that you just follow. I'm just going to, follow along this path. I'll play at this level and eventually I'll play for Canada. And I can tell you, getting the chance to spend some time with some of the folks that do play at that level, it's never a straight line for them. So the chances of it being a straight line for your son or daughter are pretty limited, but support them, help them with that journey, help them to make right decisions, to create a positive environment so they keep playing. And eventually, if they aspire to play at a higher level, they'll find a way to get there if they have that ability.
Love that, Dave. I was just responding to a couple of emails, and so apologies if I seem like I was a bit out of it there, but I was listening to your journey, and I know that I've heard that one a couple of times now. I'm going to answer a couple of these off my phone, and then I see Paul snuck in there with one in Fergie time, so we'll answer Paul's, and if there's any other questions, I'll type in my contact info into the chat and look to help out with those in the coming days. So a few questions here. Is there an expectation / requirement for coach continuous development in the PDP, not just player development? So I know that there's the qualifications in terms of a youth license to be in the AYSL, the assistants are C license certified, but is there an expectation or requirement for coach continuous development?
Yes. So that's built into the new licensing program. So for those of you that maybe are coaches and have gone through older training, maybe you took a B license in 2005, and that essentially was good for life, and you never had to do any more training. That system has disappeared. So what that looks like now is a license that lasts for 3 years. During that 3-year period, you need to accumulate a certain number of professional development points in order for that license to be maintained. And if you choose not to do any professional development, well, then you need to go and either retake the course or retake the assessment, which at least from my personal experience anyway, most people would rather do some additional training along the way versus going into an environment where you're tested on your coaching, because like any test, it's super stressful, and it's generally the least favorite part of the coach education journey. So there's maintenance and professional development built into each of the licenses. And then, as I said as well, there's also a requirement that each club has coaching development plans. And it's interesting, we've just participated as Canada Soccer in a FIFA project called the Talent Ecosystem Analysis, and they actually spoke with 200 plus member associations across the country, around the world, and created kind of a report for each one of them about strengths, weaknesses in their talent identification and development system. And one of the ones that we recognize, but it's great that an external group coming to the country for the first time recognizes it as well, is that that's one of the deficiencies in our system. We don't spend enough time on internal coach development. The coach education side, take a license, that's fine, but the ongoing development piece that happens at the club level doesn't happen often enough, and there isn't an intention to it. So that's something that we've now kind of flagged as something that we need to work on with the clubs, and that will be through the licensing program and starting with the National Youth Club License Organization. So there's kind of the formal coach education piece that does have some professional development now required to be there. And then there's the informal coach development piece that needs to happen at the club level that we've got to put more of an emphasis in and make sure that it's intentional.
Thank you, Dave. Sorry, if I look down here and look like I'm straining my neck, it's because my phone is about to die and I've had to plug it into the wall. Are there playing time requirements within the AYSL? Are players meant to have certain minutes or equal playing time? So the league does not have any sort of rules that say all players must play X amount of minutes. That is a vital question that you as a parent or you as a guardian should be asking the clubs. What is their philosophy on playing time? What is the philosophy on minutes? And how does that work? So definitely something to ask there. Next question, if a player does not make one club's AYSL team, can they go to another? I'll speak to it from a Calgary perspective. Every district is a little bit different in terms of their player movement and boundary systems or lack of boundary systems. Calgary operates in a boundaryless system, so a player is free to go to another club should they choose. Provided that they're not on a do not release list and don't owe the club fees or have jerseys or anything like that the club would put them onto a do not release list for. And for those who have operated in the Calgary system for a long time know all about that. can other clubs approach players? So again, this is a Calgary question. We have spoke about this lots, and Calgary seems to be the only environment in Canada where clubs are allowed to approach players. This is something that we are taking a look at really urgently. I'll put it that way, and it's of the philosophy that if your club is approaching other players, what does that tell you about your club, right? And so I think that there's something there that parents and families need to be really cautious about. I think that it tells you potentially about the philosophy of the club right there. And I know that this is a bit of a landmine question, so I can see some people squirming. But if anyone else wants to help answer that, that'd be fantastic.
Do you want to take that, Dave? You answered it earlier on today.
And if not, you can plead the fifth, and we can move on to the next one.
No, I don't mind weighing in. I would say I agree with you, Jordan, in terms of the culture of soccer in Calgary in particular, and Alberta maybe more general, is looks a lot differently about the idea of recruitment and player movement than most areas in the country. To be honest, there's fairly limited movement in a lot of areas. There's always a few players here and there that want a different experience, prefer a different coach. Accessibility is easier going, turning left instead of turning right, so they want to take on a different program. But the amount of movement is not nearly what we see in Calgary in particular, in Alberta in general. And I would say, like I said earlier, if an organization is focused on recruiting players that are developed externally, what does that tell us about their ability to develop players within their own environment? What does it tell their community? And how does that kind of breed that loyalty? And I have conversations with clubs all the time, and I apologize if anyone is related to a club and I'm sharing secrets that I shouldn't. But I hear from them all the time, these players and their parents, they have no loyalty. They're not loyal to the club. Look how much we've given them, and they want to turn around and go down the street. It's a two-way street. So if you're demonstrating to your players and your parents that they're a commodity that will be replaced by someone who's, a little bit higher caliber in the moment, even though you may have been at the club for 5 or 6 years, that player who's never set foot at our club or played in our jersey is a little better than you. So sorry, you're out and you're now in. That doesn't breed loyalty going the other way. So if you want loyalty from the players and parents that are a part of your program, you need to show loyalty from your side as well. And I think everything that we're trying to do from a standards perspective and everything that I talked about today from an environment perspective is really about creating an environment where a club can develop players from their community with their coaches in order to be able to play at the highest level. It's not meant to create an environment where they can go shopping and pick the best players from other organizations and use that to grow their clubs. So for me anyway, I don't see any reason why outside of kind of combine environments where an organization has kind of the ability to be able to speak to players there that are demonstrating interest in the program, that a club would have to initiate contact with a player. I think if a parent or player is initiating contact with a club, different story. If someone's reaching out saying, hey, I'm curious about what your AYSL program looks like, can you tell me a bit more about it? Yeah, absolutely. Please, provide the information as a club. But to be able to show up, and have a word with someone who's playing in a different colored jersey afterwards to say, hey, what do you say to leaving this club that's done a good job of developing you to come play for me? I'm not sure that's the culture or the environment that we want to create within our system.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate that. 2 questions that I'll wrap up real quick. What roles do pro club academies play in the PDP? So pro club academies, if you look on that player pathway document that Dave shared earlier with the colors and the chevrons and the youth, senior, child, all of those levels, the pro club academies actually exist in a different box. The Rex program exists in a different box as opposed to what a standards-based league exists in. So different realm, but within the same environment, I think would be a good way of kind of summing that up in a quick box.
And I think it depends as well, Jordan, if I could just quickly, there's oftentimes in environments where the academy system at the professional level is a little more mature, that kind of those connection or touch points have been pretty well clarified. So as an example, in BC, the BC SPL feeds into the Whitecaps residential program in Vancouver. So it's a scouting opportunity. The Whitecaps are involved heavily in not the league operations, but the league scouting and keeping an eye on and tracking the players. And similarly in Ontario, TFC is an important part of that pathway as well. So the top performing players within the standards-based leagues in those environments are obviously given the opportunity to move into a professional environment from an academy level. And again, as I hope you'll see with the AYSL programs, the types of environments that National Youth Club license organizations are able to provide should be something that clubs outside of that system may not be able to. Similarly, the types of environments that a professional club can provide are, again, another step beyond what an amateur youth club can provide in terms of facilities and infrastructure and supports. These are groups that instead of having sports medicine partners have sports scientists on staff and top level resources. And in most cases, when you're in an academy proper, these aren't pay for play programs. They're supported and funded by the club's professional side of things. So they exist in a little bit of a separate space, but I do envision there being a lot of kind of clarity around what those touch points look like and how they would interact in a league like the AYSL in the same way they do already in BC and in Ontario. And I know some conversations in Quebec about what that's going to look like with the impact out there.
Thanks, Dave. Last question here from the phone, and then we'll touch on Paul's here. What happens to events like Canada Games, Alberta Games, and playing in those? Absolutely nothing as of right now. The players would still be able to play within those events, but obviously that's an ongoing evolution as this league comes into the Alberta environment, is how it interacts with competitions like that as well. So that will evolve. We will make sure that around scheduling considerations are made to make sure that players are available for things like that as well. And then last question from Paul here. Are there any training standards associated with the AYSL teams? How many times per week? What surface must be used? Is this listed and documented anywhere at all? So Dave, would you like to start off with that one?
Yeah, I can provide the information that's presented as a part of the PDP manual, which is basically the recipe for our member associations, provinces, and potentially territories if they ever go this route, in terms of what would qualify them to sit in that PDP standards-based league type area. So from that side of things, we're looking at a minimum training volume of 4.5 hours per week, based or 180 hours total, but spread out over a 40-week season would be an average of 4.5 hours per week, 3 soccer training sessions per week, and at least 1 day of rest. So we're not playing soccer 7 days a week. We need to give that opportunity to be able to get off of the field. There's also maximums in terms of training, which sometimes can be something that we run into as well. So at older ages, 15 plus, that would be 330 hours over a 44-week season, which is 7.5 hours per week, which would be, math might be wrong, but basically 5 practices a week kind of thing, or 5 contacts a week, which would be 5 training sessions plus a game, still with your day off. Younger ages, it's 6 hours a week for your 13s and your 14s over that same season. So that would be 4 days a week plus your game, which gives you a couple of days potentially to be off. In terms of facilities, the outdoor one's a lot more easily discussed because there's more consistency there. When we get to indoor soccer, it becomes a challenge, obviously, to have any consistency there. But For outdoor, we're looking at quality fields with kind of FIFA approved dimensions. And I don't know whether this is a challenge in Alberta or not. I know there's some areas of the country where actually getting enough space to run a training session, a proper training session, can be a challenge. So we're saying at least one of your training sessions per week, you've got to have access to at least half of a field, a full field shared between two teams, so that you can work on some of the kind of more 11-a-side full field aspects. I know for those of you that have played and coached, if you never see, for example, the picture as a back four of the ball coming out from a goal, because you're only ever playing in quarters of a field, you're going to have a hard time reacting to that when the situation arises. So and then indoor, it's a little bit more flexible, because we know not everyone is blessed with indoor facilities that are full size, that domes and bubbles and whatnot. So you have to have access to a minimum amount of space, but it's a lot less prescriptive in terms of the number of times you need to be on field, because we know wintertime, especially in the prairies, facilities are tough to come by. So the outdoor season's a lot more tightly kind of presented than the indoor, but hopefully that answers. And I don't know, Jordan, whether there's anything, or John, whether there's anything in the operational guidelines that kind of is public information and presented out there. The information I'm sharing is basically the document Canada Soccer put together for the league providers to understand what the expectations are.
Yeah, the guidelines really for the clubs in terms of what they're delivering and how and when are in alignment to the National Youth Club license. There is information on the Alberta Youth Soccer website. But again, I think the key message that we've been saying all evening is talk to the clubs, see what they're offering, and if that fits your child and their development and schedule even. I'm imagining that there's a lot of parents on here with multiple children. If one is committed to this program, how do you balance that? So I think that's a key question that I want parents to take away tonight is, how does this fit with my child and their development? Any more questions, Jordan?
I have none, but I think that's because I said that's it after that one question from Paul. So I think that's maybe why it stopped. What I'll do is I'll wrap it up now. I think there's some people just saying thank you and such, but John and Dave, on behalf of all of the parents, probably some players that attended tonight, thank you very much for your candor, for giving us this information, for spending a ton of time with us tonight. Over 2 hours we've gone. So thank you. Thank you for continuing to build the game within Alberta together, for showing a vested interest in aligning all of the districts, the provinces, the national governing body together to get us pulling in the right direction. So just on behalf of everyone on the call, just thank you. And then for everyone that's left on the call, thank you as well for attending. Showing this kind of investment in yourselves and in your children is amazing. Over 100 people, almost 150 people attended tonight, which is tremendous. So we now have 150 well-informed parents to go and tell 5 more each, so that this word can spread, and so that the good work that's being done at all levels of the game can really be highlighted, and we can celebrate that, because this is a moment in time for Canada Soccer and for everyone involved in Canada Soccer to be celebrating. We're entering a fantastic period right now, and what a privilege it is for all of us, I think, to be a part of it. So again, thank you for investing in yourselves tonight and investing in your families.
Thank you all.
Thanks, awesome, everyone, and thanks for the great questions. It's been my pleasure.
So on that, I am going to hit leave. This is going to end, I promise, and wish you all a good night, and take care. We'll see some of you on Saturday. this is how we find out who fell asleep at the wheel, everyone who's left. So again, I would encourage you to take off, enjoy the rest of your evening, and thank you.